Yeah, no one wants to expose themselves. Let's be honest, right? They don't want to sort of like they want to cheerlead for Web3, within these Web2 companies. So the issue really, not the issue, but what really needs to happen is having these conversations and just not thinking that you're going to close a deal every week. It's like that's not really what's important.
Welcome to Netcetera, the official podcast and newsletter powered by Myosin XYZ, the ultimate marketing network. I'm Blake Minho Kim, co-founder of Myosin XYZ, and join me as each week I talk to leaders working at the forefront of innovation, whether they're at traditional brands, Web3 or AI companies, or otherwise, to demystify the latest and emerging tech that's shaping the new internet for a brighter future. Today, we'll be speaking with Paul Chodirker, Director of Enterprise and BD at Ava Labs, the company helping grow the Avalanche blockchain, a leading L1 in the world of Web3. Paul comes from a fascinating background in entertainment and law at Live Nation, as well as some time leading the entertainment BD team at Polygon prior to coming to Ava Labs. If you're interested in learning about how and why enterprise brands should be thinking about blockchain adoption, this is a great listen. So without further ado, let's get into it. Here's episode number 2 with Paul Chodirker. All right. Thanks for hopping on, Paul. How you been?
I'm good, man. How are you?
Doing well. It's a gray Wednesday, but excited to chat. So I've been really looking forward to this chat for a while. But to kick things off, as we always do, would love to have you share your origin story. So could you tell us a bit about your journey in blockchain, aka where'd you come from and how did you find yourself to where you are today?
Yeah, sounds good. My story is pretty interesting in that I've sort of done very different stuff before entering into Web3. So maybe I'll go chronologically and go that way. So before I joined Ava Labs, I was with Polygon doing something very similar on the BD enterprise side as well. And then prior to that, I was working on a startup project within the Near ecosystem. So I've sort of been around various protocols within the space. But before that, I had a very different life. I was a entertainment IP attorney, spent 8+ years with Live Nation Entertainment. So I'm based in Toronto, but I actually worked for Live Nation US Concerts, and before that, worked at Live Nation Global Touring. So I've worked on concerts for like Lady Gaga, Rihanna, U2, Madonna, like you name it, right? And so what happened was the pandemic hits and the concert business literally shuts down to a halt. There was no business to be had. So during my time off, let's say, I had already done a lot of reading and writing and researching on the Web3 space. And that was my jumping off point. It's like, it's now or never. And so that's what I did. So I left Live Nation during the pandemic to join a project and haven't looked back since. And it's been a wild ride, but really enjoyed it. So really my interest in Web3 came from, intellectual property and entertainment and how we can monetize and commercialize property on the blockchain in that respect. So that's sort of where I came from.
I love that. And it makes a lot of sense, right? Because I think I met someone from Live Nation like last year or this year, I think at NFT NYC, and like they've been playing around in the Web3 space for, I think, a hot second now, right? So
yeah, like everyone in the concert and ticketing business, they always come to me and say, oh, ticketing, that makes perfect sense for Web3, because I think like conceptually, it's really easy to make the use case of ticketing on blockchain or, access control for concerts or live events on blockchain, which makes sense. It's like, yeah, but it's highly, highly competitive. There's some complications. The use case is amazing. I totally agree. But then once you bring sort of the commercial aspects into it, that's where the difficulty comes in. But yeah, very much so, like Live Nation, AEG, all the big players, certainly looking around and exploring the Web3 space.
I love that. Yeah, and it's always this tricky thing with it. It's the idea and the concept is always there, right? But it always comes down to execution, market dynamics, who can actually pull this off at scale in a way where all the stakeholders win, right?
Yeah, and that's the difficulty, right? And I think when Web3 got really hot, like at the height of the hype cycle, everyone wanted to do ticketing. I must have seen a dozen plus projects that were looking into it. And the ones that sort of started their pitch saying, well, we want to take down Ticketmaster, or we want to be the ones that win the battle. It's like, okay,
it's that easy.
Yeah. It's like you may have lost me a little bit at that point, because like for me, it really wasn't about, the thesis of finding something completely new. It's integrating blockchain with something to make it better, more efficient, whether that's Ticketmaster or any number of ticketing platforms. I think that's sort of the way one should go about it. So yeah, it's been an interesting transition in terms of just what we've done in the hype cycle and into like the current environment, and how platforms are kind of like making more specific choices, let's say.
I love that. I love that. And I mean, I'm really excited to dive into that. But before we go too deep, right, I do want to make sure that, all our listeners are fully up to date, right, on Ava Labs, Avalanche, right? Because I think, our listeners, a lot of them are Web3 native, but we're also talking to brand leaders and people who may not be as familiar. So we'd love to have you kind of explain a bit more about Ava Labs, its relationship to the Avalanche blockchain, and what actually makes you guys so distinct, or how do you guys think about it when you're talking to brands?
Yeah, I guess the easiest way to say it is like Ava Labs is a software company. So what we're really doing is building infrastructure, tooling, partnerships, driving the growth towards the Avalanche blockchain. Of course, the Avalanche blockchain is an open source protocol, layer one protocol. And so I don't come from a technical background, right? So I was a previous attorney that got into the technology game. So I feel as if I can maybe speak from a Web 2 perspective or a non-technical perspective.
I'd love to have that, because I think
try.
right now we have too much technical perspective.
Yeah,
Let's get a brand
I
leader point of view.
like I'm not a jargon kind of guy. I have no interest in sort of like espousing that. So yeah, and so at the base level, Avalanche is a layer one open source protocol. I think some key differentiators in terms of the protocol are just the speed, time to finality. We're one of the fastest in the entire Web3 ecosystem, with a unique consensus mechanism. And then because of that, you're able to scale. And also because of this unique consensus mechanism, we have something called subnets, which is deploying your own custom blockchain. So for us, it's not fitting a square peg in a round hole and talking to these large enterprise clients and saying, well, you must build like this with these parameters in this environment. It's, hey, like, let's make sure we're building for you and for the right vertical. That may mean, working in EVM. That may mean working in a different virtual machine environment. That may mean, building a permissionless environment or a permission environment. It's like we're trying to allow enterprises to sort of like pick and choose. So that's really the narrative we're going after at the moment.
I love that. Yeah, and I'm sure like modularity is really important, right? Because I think the reality is kind of tying it back to what you were talking about before, right? It's this idea of when a new technology comes in, it's not like we just throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's about how do you adapt what's already there and start to, evolve the thing, right? So I love that approach. It makes a lot of sense. And so actually diving into that, right? Let's talk about your role with enterprise, right? So I guess maybe let's start there in terms of how do you, what does your day-to-day look like? How are you thinking about it? And then we can kind of dive into, the deeper conversations. Yeah.
So technically, I lead enterprise for business development at Ava Labs. So what enterprise really means is, so we have various verticals within Ava Labs. So we have gaming, DeFi, institutional, and so for me, it's anything that doesn't fit those particular boxes. They typically come to enterprise. And so enterprise could be, the way I like to put it is Fortune 500 companies and all the seams in between, right? So there's all sorts of different verticals that could be coming to us. So, because of my concentration or background in media and entertainment, certainly speaking to a lot of entertainment media companies. But then, again, I'm really interested in the more sort of what you want to call boring or base layer or plumbing level, whatever nomenclature you want. Where blockchain really provides the most efficiencies, where we don't really need to like sell the technology. So that could be healthcare and telco and Internet of Things and supply chain and all that stuff that doesn't really need a fancy press release or any kind of sexy tweet. It's like that's what I'm really interested in digging in on. And so all of those conversations are being had. So my day really is made up of speaking to those enterprise clients, some of which have greater sophistication than others with regards to the blockchain. So it could be just explaining how Avalanche is different, or how they could build on a subnet and some of the efficiencies and ROIs that they can get from doing that. And then the other half of the time, I would say I speak to a lot of startup projects. So a lot of platforms that are building various integrations that we could use with some of those partners. And then when I'm not doing those two things, I'm connecting the dots. So connecting the dots between some of these partners that we have already building on Avalanche and some of those enterprise clients that are thinking of doing it, or maybe have already started to do so. So it's a lot of conversations. It's a lot of relationship building, as you can imagine.
It's building the ecosystem, right? Because at the end of the day, especially in this space, it's such a small one. We have to keep working together.
Yeah. I mean, like, to be honest, I think when I first approached the Web3 space, it was trying to sell, right? It's like, it was a total like ABC environment, right? And it's just not like that anymore. The way I've sort of explained it to some of these enterprise clients is 2023 has really been about relationship building. explaining sort of how the blockchain space has changed since 2022, 2021, how it's become a lot better, in fact, and especially for consumer facing platforms. I mean, it was really clunky. I mean, things were really clunky when it came to consumer applications. And it's tough because most of the individuals that came into the blockchain space happened in the last 2 years. And they didn't see great front end products, right? They saw a lot of these
horrendous.
Horrendous. And so now things have gone a lot better and the environment is much tougher. But having said that, a lot of conversations are happening in the background, a lot of building in the background. So for me, 2024 hopefully is the year of integration, and 2023 has been about relationship building.
That's what we're all pushing for, right? As people say, you got to build on the bear, right?
Yep.
The serious people are still here, right? The shieldsters and the people who came in just to turn a quick buck, they're not interested anymore. So I agree with you. All the conferences I've been to, you're starting to see a lot of familiar faces and you're saying, okay, you're a serious person. You're really thinking about how do we create mass adoption? How do we help these brands understand that this really is where the future is headed? And how do we help them get there? Because if they get there, then we all get there, right? And we can all win.
Yeah, like I would say, call it 2 years ago, it was explaining what blockchain is. A year ago, it was explaining, what they could build. And now there's no explanation necessary. It's the ones that have stuck around on the enterprise side get it. And it's like, okay, what is the best project possible for us? Which again, was so different from a year or two ago, which was, let's just get something out as quickly as possible. Let's open up our budgets because it's a cool new tech that everyone is talking about. And a lot of these projects have just died on the vine. Like, let's be honest, right? They just didn't have any legs to them. So at least now the discussions are much more like, not just sophisticated, but they're much more thoughtful, right?
Yep.
So
it's not just let's launch an NFT collection,
nope,
right? And then it just
all.
tanks, and then you're like, what was the point of this? And then everyone feels rugged, whether it's the C-suite or the consumers. It's not good for anyone.
Yeah, no one wants to expose themselves, let's be honest, right? They don't want to sort of like, they want to cheerlead for Web3, within these Web2 companies. So the issue really, not the issue, but what really needs to happen is having these conversations and just not thinking that you're going to close a deal every week. It's like, that's not really what's important. Like, let's structure a deal. Let's talk about what you need. The first question I always ask, when I'm on some of these calls is, what are you looking to do? Which seems really simplistic, but that's not really the conversations we were having a couple of years ago, right? It's like, what can we just get out there as quickly as possible? So that whole narrative is gone, which is frankly really refreshing.
I love that. And I actually want to dive deep into that because I think that's kind of the next phase of questions I want to dive into is, as someone who talks to these brands all day, every other day, how do you feel? Well, I guess you already kind of answered the first part, right? Which is how are the conversations shifted? But then I guess the other part is like, what are the most interests, or what are people looking for, right? Are they looking for full business transformation? Are they still looking for some marketing activations? Are they really thinking about brand loyalty, or what are I'm curious. Yeah, let's start there.
I think they're really looking to understand their community better. So their clientele, their consumers, if you will. Whereas before, I think a lot of the loyalty programs that some of these enterprise clients put out there were just sort of like shots in the dark. It's like, hey, really, it's still kind of like stamp 10 coffees and you get the 11th for free. Like, really, we still live in those kinds of days. So at that point, you don't have a clue who your consumer is. You don't know how many coffees they're buying. You don't know what kind of coffee they're buying. You don't know which stores they go to when they leave the coffee shop, et cetera. And that's this whole dream of interoperability where you can understand your consumer much better, especially like in a cookieless world. We want to be able to engage our consumers and allow them to choose to provide their data and say, okay, I will engage you and I will tell you all about my, my purchasing habits, but you've got to reward me for that. Reward me for my time, for my energy, and for my information. So that's a lot of the discussions we're having now, which is companies understand they need to understand their customers better, and the blockchain really does that.
I love that. And that's something we talk about all the time as well. And we've had this conversation and we're building some products there as well. It's like this idea of opt-in marketing, right? It's cookies are dying. We all know that, right? CAC is through the roof, customer acquisition costs for those who may or may not know, right? All these things are changing and the world of digital is fast changing, right? And so this is where blockchain, we all get so excited about. So I love it. You're speaking my language.
And again, the nice thing is that I don't need to convince them that this is how it should be, right? It's like, let's not fly the 1,000,000 miles to get a free bag on your next flight. It's let's give the free bag on flight number 1. Let's automatically get you to a higher tier. Let's automatically reward you for your energy. Again, it comes down to like, does Company X understand that their consumers, are important? They're not just sort of like I don't know, dots on a graph, if you will, or on a grid. It's, they have real spending, buying, consumption habits that differentiate. And let's kind of dig in on that and understand those metrics.
I love that. I love that. I want to flip this actually on its head, right? So those are the reasons someone should be using it. But I'm curious about, from the brands, what's the pushback you're hearing in terms of what are reasons they wouldn't want to adopt or start to even, or like as you're having these conversations, what are the most common points of pushback where they're saying, yeah, but, or why are we doing this on the blockchain? Why aren't we just doing this on AWS or just like a centralized server or whatever it is?
I think honestly, the biggest challenge has just been like reputationally, like what's happened in the space over the last year or so. So all of these projects that we all cringe about, that we all sort of see in the headlines, make no mistake, these companies have thought about it, and they don't want to expose themselves to something that could be deemed negative, that could be deemed something that might be off-putting or offline. So a big part of it is we don't have regulatory clarity. I don't need to get into that because it's kind of boring for this podcast, but it's true because in North America, the conversations I'm having are, we'd love to do this. We're interested. We need to understand the regulatory environment better so we're not stepping on our own feet, versus maybe some other regions of the world, maybe thinking specifically of APAC, where they're just building and they're deploying and they're integrating and they're doing it right. So I think when North America, the US specifically, catches up, I really think you're going to see a huge explosion, because I think a lot of the companies have gone over the fact that reputationally there was sort of that narrative, that negative narrative of the speculative market within blockchain, but the tech still makes sense in certain cases. So now if we just get some clarity, from regulators, we'll be able to sort of like put our best foot forward and start actually deploying these things to the public. Because right now, so much is being built on testnet, so much is being built in beta. And as soon as we can sort of like unleash it, I think you're going to see a huge sort of momentum swing.
I can't wait. And I agree.
We're all waiting for it.
Yeah. It's all coming. It's all coming. I will say it's night and day. I was just and we've talked about this. I was just in Asia last month, right? Korea, for Korea Blockchain Week, Token 2049 in Singapore. And as you're saying, every single major corporate enterprise, they're all moving in that direction. And so it's rather unfortunate that we're a little behind at the moment, but hopefully in the next year or two, we'll start to see a bit more of that regulatory clarity that, pushes this industry forward.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned like Korea Blockchain Week, Token 2049, and just speaking about the differences of maybe the geographic or like jurisdictional differences. So I was at another conference, a different conference in North America, that maybe wasn't as highly attended, let's put it that way. And half of our team was at Token 2049, Korea Blockchain Week. And I just kept showing everyone on my phone at this other conference the mania that was happening at these conferences across the pond, right? Like it was happening. It was jammed. It was engaging. Like it was super exciting. So it's like, you're in this one environment where one could think, oh, maybe the momentum has shifted. And it's like, no. Just take a look at another part of the world, because it was really exciting what was happening over there. And I was literally showing people on my phone, the Avalanche house that we had set up in Seoul, which was mega.
That was incredible, by the way.
Yeah.
For those who may not be aware, you should just go Google, what was it, Avalanche Floating Islands, right?
It was outrageous. It was
amazing.
Really cool. Yeah.
Great venue. Really cool. You guys crushed it.
So,
I saw a lot of the team there.
Thank you. Oh, our events team is like, there's no comparison. Like they're awesome. They're amazing.
Top notch.
Yeah.
Pushing forward, right? So would love to, when we talk about enterprise adoption, right, there's all types. I think you kind of touched on some of those earlier, right? With healthcare, telecom, that's one side of things. I think that's more like B2B, there's B2C. What are you kind of seeing in terms of momentum there, I guess, or the industries that you're most bullish on, I guess, in the immediate future, and then even like looking forward into the next couple of years where things are headed based on the conversations you're having?
Yeah, so maybe I'll put it as my top three. We'll make it easy. So my top one is obviously I have a bias as entertainment and media, and so the large studios that all are fighting and clamoring for consumer engagement and to sort of like kill the churn, if you will. It's like, for example, and I'm just using this as an example. Obviously, it's like as soon as Ahsoka is over on Disney Plus, how many people are leaving that platform? It's like, how do we keep the churn from happening? So a lot of these studios want to understand, how can we engage our consumers better so that they're going to stick around, frankly. So I think that's going to be something really interesting, whether that's like, watch to earn or, rewarding anyone with a profile on any of these number of platforms with, token gated content or whatever. That's sort of up to the studios. But I think that's going to be a big part of what they're going to be doing, like post WGA strike, SAG strike, et cetera, is really digging in on how we can provide a unique experience. Because right now it's like just a free for all. It's, hey, our platform is $10 a month. This is what you're getting. And once the big show is over, you kind of lose half that audience. So that's
just everyone just hopping between platforms for this show's great. And I'm going to watch this thing. You're right. I'm one of those people. There's absolutely no loyalty today.
That's right. And if I go see Barbie in the theaters, shouldn't I be rewarded to go like maybe join Max? Or if I'm a Max customer, shouldn't I be rewarded to go see Barbie or whatever? Again, I'm using that as an example, but that's what consumers are clamoring for. And I think the studios and those who sort of own the IP get it. I don't think it's a lack of wanting to engage in something novel. I think it's finding what the right product is. And again, to reiterate, this is a year where a lot better platforms are coming out of the woodwork. I'm seeing them. They're much more smooth on the UI UX side. So you're going to see a lot of cool stuff, hopefully. So that's my number one. So number two, is probably hospitality, right? So, hotels, travel, et cetera. I think especially with sort of the AI, hype, if you will. I think there's a lot we can do in that respect. So, curated itineraries, being able to, choose a destination, having, your entire trip curated for you, having unique experiences that could be token gated, using AI to understand what your consumer preferences are. I think that's all really interesting. And then that ties into my number three, which is travel and especially the airlines. So, we've seen Etihad do a really interesting loyalty program. We're speaking to a number of different airlines and other players in that field. And I think they really want to find a different way to engage Gen X on this, right? Which is loyalty is boring. It's just boring. You're not getting the right customers and you're just going for the lowest common price. And that's what you're booking these days. But what if we can reward you earlier than that? So a lot of these airlines understand that and they want to engage on that. So those are sort of just a couple of the verticals we're definitely digging in on.
I love that. Yeah, I think and it's an interesting thing, right? Because I feel like as the world becomes more digital, right? And as people start to travel a lot more, everyone's overwhelmed with options, right? And so that's where this kind of customer, I don't know if this is the right word, but customer promiscuity, right? They're just like, there's no loyalty. Everyone's all over the place. So everyone's kind of fighting for the same. There's only so many consumers. So how do you really unlock, as you're talking about, that loyalty, that retention, and providing that value add beyond just, hey, we're cheap, right? Because then it's just a race to the bottom. Everyone's just fighting over the scraps, right?
And let's be frank. I won't be eloquent when I say this, but loyalty is boring. Loyalty is uncool. No one cares about loyalty X, loyalty Y. It's can we do something that's more engaging? I'm not just saying it's not as simple as gamifying the thing, but can we not be more engaging? Can we not have a more understanding that, most communities are digital first now. That's what they understand. That's how they want to engage with their travel. And so let's build it for them. And I don't see that right now. I see a lot of these loyalty programs building for an entirely new generation. And so that's my hope, at least in the coming years, we're going to see much more interesting loyalty programs that are going to be using blockchain as a base layer.
I love that. And that actually kind of makes me think about this is a bit more unprompted and spontaneous question, which is around collaborations between brands. Because I think there's this really interesting, we're already starting to see it, I think, with retail and luxury, where you're seeing Doritos launch a clothing brand, or, hospitality brand, or, Restoration Hardware, they launched a hotel, or Muji launched a hotel. So everyone is kind of cross-pollinating and everyone's becoming a lifestyle brand. So I guess this is number one. How do you feel about that? Are you hearing those types of conversations? And then the next thing is, what would be almost your dream collaboration between brands that you're really excited about and partnering up?
Yeah, so I'm definitely hearing about that, right? So if companies aren't competitive with each other, they definitely want to use partners that could enhance a customer experience. If we go back to my earlier example of the airline, so there's no reason why a Delta and American Airlines or what have you couldn't partner with a Booking.com or an Expedia or a Marriott, if you will. And then any number of different experiences once you get to your destination. So we're not just talking about hotels. What about restaurants? What about entertainment? So now we're talking about again, this is just an example, Delta partnering with Expedia and partnering with AEG, right, for a concert or an event that you're going to go to for that specific reason. So yes, we're definitely like speaking to companies that want to do that. They want to engage with partners that aren't owned under their umbrella of companies. And then companies that are conglomerates that own a number of different verticals certainly are looking to do that. Like the SK Planet subnet that's built on Avalanche is a really good example of that. That's the second biggest conglomerate in all of Korea, right? In South Korea. And so they're doing some amazing stuff because they have any number of industries under their umbrella of companies. And so they want to integrate all of them. So again, they can do that on a subnet where you can have a major company A with any number of different sort of industry verticals and connect them all through one particular blockchain that they're going to build. So there's no reason why you can't do that with any number of different verticals as well. So that conversation is super exciting. That's where I think we're absolutely heading. And frankly, that's what, Ava Labs is counting on, frankly, with our deployment of subnets.
I freaking love that. And that's actually the perfect use case, right? Is the integration across all these different verticals, across that experience, right? Unified, underpinned by a single blockchain layer where it's all connected. I love that.
And then not to mention that, I was just going to say, not to mention that if subnet A, like, an SK or another subnet, like another entertainment company or another consumer brand has a different subnet, the eventuality where they won't have to bridge to share information, to be able to speak to each other, to be able to trade assets, right? And then you're really cooking, right? That's that whole dream of interoperability and being a network of networks or a blockchain of blockchains, right? That'll be really cool. So that's sort of like where we're trying to get to.
I love that. Well, I think we're all headed there, right? We just need more consumer applications. We need more people talking to these brands to help them understand how to pull that off. And so it's all coming. If only there were some people doing that. I don't know.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we're out there. We're out there working, planting seeds, right?
Exactly. They'll be sprouting very soon. I'm sure.
Yeah.
So building on all this, right? Would love to, and maybe SK is the best example, but would love to hear about some of the more interesting activations. And from that, I think we're always interested in kind of the getting a bit tactical here in terms of, what were the learnings, I guess, in terms of what to do, what not to do, especially from like a brand perspective, as you're starting to enter the space, as you're kind of shepherding and guiding these people into the world of Web3. What are some of the biggest learnings that you've had, I guess, to date?
Yeah, that you really need that hook. So like the front end has to be very, very smooth. So, it's that old saying, like technology should look like magic. And it's true, right? So like, again, the technology could be as good as it can be, but if you can't onboard seamlessly with like one or two max touches of a button, then you've already lost the consumer. So that's the first thing. And again, that's getting better. So once we understand that, these enterprise clients know that they need to build something that isn't clunky anymore, and those offerings are available now. And then the other thing is to really have a long-term plan. Like you said, we don't want to drop a bunch of valueless or utility-less NFTs if it's not going to get us anywhere, right? The NFTs or the badges or whatever you want to call it these days should have a real purpose, right? And should provide that FOMO feeling, sure, but you've got to really understand as a company and have that buy-in where, if these individuals are going to spend their time and money and effort to go get these tokens, then they should be able to open up a brand new shopping experience, consumer experience, watching experience. And so for us, it's really important that a company has buy-in. If we're talking to a company and they're just doing it for the sake of doing it so they could say, okay, we built something on the blockchain, it never lasts. But when we engage with companies who have thought about it, who have planned it out, who understand what step A, B, and C are going to be, then it tends to work out much better. And again, you're trying to provide an entirely new experience for these consumers. So that should be mapped out beforehand. So before we dig in and start integrating and developing and helping these companies put something on chain, we really want to see buy-in and understand that they have this sort of grand plan of how they're going to use it. So that's been a challenge and an advantage, frankly.
I love that. Yeah, and then that's the hard part always is the balance between the short-term wins from like, hey, we just want this marketing hit, which I think was a big part of the past couple of years. And like you're talking about, that long-term kind of strategic alignment with the leadership and the marketing team and the innovation team, and how does this actually help evolve this business moving forward?
Because it doesn't help anybody within the space if a really cool project comes out and dies a month or two later. In fact, it's much more detrimental, right? Rather had not seen it. Yeah, I'd rather have not seen it at all, right? So for us, we were really, really careful with that. As you can probably tell, if you sort of like are around the Avalanche ecosystem, we don't put out press releases unless we mean it. Like, we're not there for the quick sort of like adrenaline hit, if you will. We're really there to sort of scope out and understand what projects we want to build for the long term, because otherwise it doesn't work for us and it won't work for the entire ecosystem either.
I love that. And that actually kind of sparked a different thought in me, as I think, some of the stuff we've been seeing is it seems like a lot of corporates there was a lot of news, I think, over the past couple of years about like different corporates doing like proof of concepts that have kind of seemed to have fizzled out a little bit. So I guess maybe the question to you is just more, how if a corporation has been feels a bit burned or a bit quote unquote rugged, right, as they say within our industry, what's the best way for them to I guess, get over that hurdle, right? And recognize that there is something there. Maybe it just was not executed in the right way. I don't know. It's just a reflection. Yeah.
Yeah, to be honest, a lot of the time when companies have done that, and by the way, there are a lot of companies that maybe feel rugged or feel that they sort of not were taken advantage of, but maybe they rushed into things. I think that's a much more accurate way to put it. I think there's a lot of self-reflection that's done internally at these companies. And so for us, it's not even about convincing. It's more about understanding, the lessons learned from those initial projects. I mean, listen, we get a lot of projects that were on different protocols, or maybe they didn't think about them thoroughly. Those are a lot of the calls that we're taking. It's, hey, we're trying something new and we're trying something different. So the skittishness to get over that, it's, okay, this is the current environment and this is the current technology that is different from that, right? So to understand that. And also, I mean, again, 2 years ago, you really didn't know who all the players were. You didn't know who you could trust. I think we've sort of like skimmed a lot of the toxic players out. So from that perspective, for every 100 calls I took 2 years ago, 95 of them were garbage, right? Like, let's just be honest. So now I think naturally there's been this like natural vetting process where a lot of the large companies know, okay, Ava Labs is still around. They're still building really cool stuff. There's almost this intrinsic trust that I don't even need to convince of at this point. It's sort of natural, but otherwise it's making them feel comfortable with how the technology has changed over the last year or two, because the technology has changed a lot, what others are building that seems to be working and what didn't work in the past. So it's really a give and take. It's really, again, it goes back to building that relationship.
I love that. And actually, and continuing to build on that, right? I think when it comes to mass adoption, right, and helping these people understand that this is where it's all headed, I guess the question in this case is, what do you think is missing in the space outside of, I guess, there's regulatory clarity, there's getting over that initial trust hurdle, and there's a bunch of other stuff, but would love to kind of get your hot take on that as well. What more do we need that maybe isn't here today that we need more of? So it's like an open call to the world. We can manifest it. Let's put it that way. Or
maybe this is a hot take. Maybe it's not. You can be the judge. But blockchain Web3 still doesn't have that killer app. Like, I work in this space and I can freely admit that, right? Like, ChatGPT was a killer app. It brought on millions of people who tried it out, who didn't understand what the hell AI was or what it could do, and they all tried it out. I haven't seen one of those in this space. So like, as soon as we can get that killer app, I think we're going to see some of that mass adoption like you're talking about. Again, I don't know if that's a hot take, because I think it's pretty true, if I'm not mistaken. But I think that would be my answer in terms, that's sort of where my mind goes.
So that's a good one. I have heard that a couple times before, but I think it's very true, and I agree with that. My counter to that would be, and I don't think Friend Tech is the killer app, but I am curious to get your hot take on Friend Tech, because I think, at least within our industry, that was the thing that blew up. And now you have a version of that on every blockchain, including Avalanche and, all of them, right? So maybe that's not the killer app, but would love to get, what are your feelings, I guess, considering how much it blew up and how it's starting to take on this narrative, it's starting to push this consumer crypto narrative forward a little bit. Whether or not it's a good thing or a bad thing is a topic of discussion, but we'd love to hear your thoughts there.
Yeah, okay, so we're talking about Stars Arena here in the Avalanche ecosystem, obviously, which I think is super cool. And if you spend a single second on X, I still call it Twitter, by the way. I don't.
Yeah, I
don't buy in. I don't care. So I'll just call it Twitter, if you don't mind, for the sake of this podcast. It's blowing up, right? It's been a hugely engaging product that people want to use. I think even more than Stars Arena as a product, or Friends Tech, or what have you. I think it sort of shows you what like SocialFi, or just a totally different way to engage that sort of like vertical could be, which is again like no intermediary, rewarding people for their engagement, rewarding people for their follows. Again, it could work in any number of verticals, but for me, that's the most important thing. It's like there is real engagement. It's just again, how do we get to a point where like everyone understands how to use it? Everyone can use it really simply. We're not using all sorts of jargon to try to explain what it is. It just becomes sort of the natural new thing, right? I think we all have a lot of disappointments with some of our current like monster platforms like an X or Twitter or Meta, et cetera, right? So like, what's the better way? So like Stars Arena is showing you like this could very much be a better way. And then it just becomes an exercise of engagement. Like, how do we get more people engaged and using the product?
Yep. Yep. It's all coming. Let's see what happens. Yeah, it's an early experiment, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, the nice thing is like just how much hype and how much people have enjoyed just using the platform. Like that's the cool part, right? It's like I can tell you in no uncertain terms, like internally, there is so much like fun being had with regards to like people within Ava Labs that love to use it, and they're not doing it for the sake of marketing or to put out a tweet just because. Like they're not cheerleading it for the sake of cheerleading. Like they legitimately love to use this platform, and like that's the cool part. It's like when you get people internally who are like just going wild over it and you see real engagement on it, like I mean that's cool, and that sort of gives you like hope for other products like it.
Yeah, yeah, it's all coming. Let's see what happens, right?
Yep.
But I love that it's happening. It's happening. So I want to kind of push forward into emerging tech more broadly, right? So I think we've been talking about Web3 this whole time, blockchain. Obviously, it's a big part of what we do. It's part of what we do. It's part of what it's a big part of all of this. But I think the other thing, and we lightly touched on this earlier, right? But AI, right? It's been the hot buzzword over the entire year. Curious about when you're talking to enterprise, how that conversation has shifted. Number one, are they saying, yeah, blockchain, it's interesting, but we just want to, do some AI hit? And I'm sure you're probably seeing a lot of the similar kind of behavior of that short-term thinking of we just need to do something in AI versus thinking about how it fits in that longer-term vision. But curious on the opportunities there, and then also how those things come together, right? Because I think we've talked about this before, right? Is like how does AI, how do blockchain eventually come to this almost like synergistic moment where it kind of pushes us into maybe that's the next killer app, right? Maybe it's not only blockchain, maybe it's both. I don't know.
Usually that's what happens, right? It's like we always think we're going to be siloed and it'll just be like blockchain that'll become the thing, or just AI. And typically it's a melding of a lot of different technologies. I mean, like AI and blockchain are just fundamentally different from each other. Like with AI, it's a creative tool with like infinite abundance, if you will. And I think blockchain or Web3 can kind of cut through that abundance and distinguish it from what is human versus what is artificially created. So for me, again, I always think of it from like the entertainment IP side because of my background. It's like, okay, so we have millions and millions of generative IP, be it songs or videos or whatever. Okay, but we're going to need to know like what entity had created those. We're going to need to be able to monetize that IP. We're going to be able to, we're going to need the blockchain for that data and for that identification purposes. So I think the two can work together. From an industry perspective, you're 100% right. A lot of the conversations that we have is we've got to do something with AI. We've got budget for AI. The budget for Web3 was 2 years ago. It's like, give us something with an AI angle. But the fact is the two can very much marry each other. I spoke earlier on the fact that like, if you're building something for hospitality and you want to get your itinerary built specifically for you, AI is a really good tool for that. And then blockchain could come in on that sort of tokenized and token gated experience, and also understanding who that client is, what previous trips they've taken, and be able to connect various companies on chain where there's no intermediary, where they can book their flight, their hotel, their entertainment without doing anything other than having, call it a single token, if you will.
What an incredible experience that would be, right?
There you go.
Yeah, someone should build that. Fingers crossed.
I think so. Right? We should chat.
Yeah, we should chat. Let's have a conversation.
Yeah. But it's true though, right? It's like, it's so simplistic in that, like, of course, companies want to get on the AI train. It's like, again, no one wants to look foolish internally. They want to sort of be able to like get ahead of the curve. And so if AI is the thing now, that's fine. But then it's our job in Web3 to understand, like, how can we enhance that experience? Again, how can blockchain come in as a base layer to secure that experience? And so I think there's very much a melding, if you will, that's available. I don't exclude AI from what we're trying to do. It just kind of depends on what one can build, which I think is really exciting.
And people have to build more consumer apps, right? I think that's a huge part of, like, as you were talking about, like, we're in this bear market. The serious people here, who's building these consumer applications that can actually, like you said, convince these enterprise companies that, hey, we can start with AI, but we need to recognize, as you just said, right? In an era of abundance, when you can create infinite things, how do we verify what's true, what is real, what do people own, and how do you create that interoperability, like we were talking about earlier, of connecting the dots for corporates and owning that data, right? And that's a different type of data that you can start to generate, right? Because if people, let's take this AI, almost like a itinerary creator, right? Now a company should be able to say, oh, we can see that Paul is generating itineraries for these types of cities. That's going to tell me a lot of interesting things here that we can then bake into our offerings later. We can start to do opt-in advertising, marketing. There's so much. It just
like
gets me so excited.
Okay, answer a question. How many tabs do you have open when you're trying to plan a trip? Because I have
billions.
like,
yeah,
right?
Too
It's
many.
too many. It's like hotel events, like whatever. It's like it's endless. So like that's nonsense. There's no reason for that to happen, right? And again, no one's speaking to me. I may be reading a blog. I may be reading an article or getting like a rating or a top 10 list of whatever destinations I want to go to. It's just absolutely ridiculous that. And again, AI will come into that. It'll help us sort of like personalize our experiences greatly. And then, again, blockchain could do that if we can offer a unique experience to individuals, and token gate that and allow us to understand what or who those individuals are taking those trips, booking those hotels, etc. So again, yeah, it's there for us. Everything is so inefficient currently in our digital world. We're just trying to make it much more efficient, which I think is exactly what blockchain does. Again, it goes back to what I said, which is like AI is abundance and blockchain is trying to make that much more efficient and cut that down.
I love it. It's all coming soon. We just got to make it happen.
Yeah.
So let's go do it. I do want to be respectful of time here, so I think we should at least bring this part to a close. But before we hop on over to rapid fire questions, which we always do, we'd love to have you tell our listeners for, on the Ava Labs front, is there anything they should be keeping their eyes open for, in the coming months, by end of year, or anything exciting happening in 2024 that any alpha that you can or are able to drop?
Yeah, I would love. Yeah, this is a hard question only because there's some cool stuff coming. Okay, I can't say what, but 2024 is going to be hot. Like honestly, I don't want to oversell it, but again, I only came on to Ava Labs a couple months ago, but in that short time, there's a lot of cool stuff percolating. So we have some really interesting projects that we're going to be announcing in the next couple weeks. I think some of the recent announcements that I got excited about, again, because of my background with Live Nation, is Dreamus, one of the largest K-pop ticketing companies in the world. And that's part of the SK Planet subnet. I mean, she's like 230 million ticket, I think, industry within Korea. And Dreamus is a huge player within that. So we just announced that last week. So again, looking to APAC to show us what North America needs to do, right? So that's going to be killer. Our gaming vertical is amazing. Like they're bringing on a AAA game. Gunzilla is the publisher. It's going to be really cool. That's going to come out, I think, in the next couple months or so. So some really cool gaming things, some really interesting entertainment stuff that we're going to be bringing into North America, I can promise.
I'm excited. And that's a good frame, right? Is look to APAC for where we're going to be in just the next couple of years. And I think the other thing is people sleep on APAC sometimes. And it's like, there's a lot of money and there's a lot of people there that we shouldn't be disregarding either.
That's been the case for years. Let's be honest, right? It's like the innovations coming from there because again, it's like a very digital first environment. Like at least from my understanding, like everyone has a digital wallet. Digital wallet doesn't even mean anything, right? That's just how one consumes. And so there was no technical lift. In North America, it's different. But again, that comes down to having that really good front end. So, individuals who don't care about blockchain and nor should they are just consuming and not even knowing it's even there.
I love that. It's all coming. That, and a quick side rant, that actually just reminds me of like, esports being a great parallel, right? In Korea, I'm Korean American. I used to go to Korea fairly often growing up, and they were playing Counter-Strike, StarCraft. They were having these giant tournaments since the 90s. And all of a sudden, over the past decade in the US, it's like, wow, this thing called esports is gigantic. We should get on it. And now it's like the thing, and now it's global. But it all started in Asia, and it's been happening for decades. So,
and I love that. And by the way, this was not planted. You didn't plan this, but we just announced a major loyalty program with one of the biggest esports teams, League of Legends teams in the entire world. I think it's T1, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not a gamer, so like you'll have to excuse me if I got that wrong. But one of the biggest teams in the world just launched their loyalty program on Avalanche. So that was a really cool announcement. Yeah.
Bullish. Yeah. We should also connect you at some point with our gaming guild, because there's a lot of fun stuff we're cooking up over there. But
you gotta get our gaming lead on. He's a good chat.
Right.
He's a good
coming
chat.
up soon. Maybe in a couple more episodes we'll bring on the gaming. We'll have a gaming special. All right, let's hop into rapid fire questions. For those who may not be aware, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. We have a bunch of questions. We'll ask, we'll have some fun, and respond as quickly as you can. So, number one, we'd love for you to pick one project, whether it's in Web3, AI, emerging tech as a whole, not including, well, I guess as a blockchain, it's hard to say not your own, right? So let's just say, what are you most bullish on within emerging tech? It could be within the Avalanche ecosystem, I guess, in this case.
Yeah, so I think the original question was not in Avalanche, because I gave you a couple of Dreamus. I thought was a really good one. Gunzilla is an excellent one for sure. I think not in blockchain. I've seen some really cool products that are still in Web 2 that hopefully will integrate in Web 3, which is all about viewership interactivity in sports. So if you're watching a football match, if you're watching, a baseball game, being able to bet, buy merch, having an entirely new experience on the front end and very, very seamless. I've seen these platforms. I think La Liga is actually doing it right now. I believe the company is called Play Anywhere. They're really cool. So that's one that I got super excited about when I saw their demo. So that's a non-Web3, non-blockchain project that I think is really cool. Yeah,
I love that. Yes. Good. Yeah, we're getting some diversity here. Cool. Next one. This one's a really fun one, actually. From our last season, we had a lot of fun with this, which is from the past 12 months. What would you say is your biggest professional learning?
That team matters. So what I mean by that is you can have the best technology, you can have good enough technology, but if the team behind it is not great, is not outstanding even, I don't see success. I'm obviously preaching as a member of Ava Labs because the team is outstanding. But for me, you asked a question in my last 12 months, that would be my answer.
I love that. And I completely agree. I think at the end of the day, it's an idea is an idea until you got to execute. And so who are the operators? Can they get it done? That's the only thing that matters at the end of the day. Because otherwise, it's a piece of paper. It's a slide deck. It's a report.
Yep.
It doesn't matter.
100%. Yeah. And by the way, speaking of slide decks, I always go to the team slide first. For me, that's always the most important thing.
Who are the operators? I love that.
Yep.
Next one. You have $1 million airdropped into, let's say, your Avalanche wallet or your bank account. What would you go build today? Period. Outside of or within emerging tech. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd build something on a subnet. That's for sure. I know, honestly, if I could, I would try to find something that connects disparate industries in terms of that interoperability play and how to do that very seamlessly, maybe even without having to get the permission from some of these companies, being able to do it organically, if you will. So that would be my answer. If I had $1 million, I'd try to figure a way to do that. Again, goes back to our conversation about being able to book a flight, a hotel, an event, all in one button without opening a single other tab. I've yet to see something as good that will do that, and I think it's coming, and I think people are building it.
Creating that collaboration. I love it. It's coming. And then last one here. Excuse me. What are your craziest predictions for emerging tech, so Web3, AI, all this, for end of year 2023 or even early 2024? What's coming up the pipe? You can get as wild as you want.
Okay, regulatory clarity.
That's pretty wild. I don't know if
it's kind of boring. It's a boring hot take, but it's very, very necessary. I think institutional adoption. I think if you look at Ava Labs specifically, we have a very heavy sort of band on institutions, financial service markets. We have an amazing vertical in that respect. I think you're going to get to see a lot of really interesting integrations with the big banks, the big funds, where they're just going to start building and deploying because it is the new way and it is the way people want to be able to run commerce. So I think that's a big one.
I'm into that. And it makes a lot of sense. We barely actually even touched on it during this conversation, but I think that's such a big part of this whole Web3 narrative, right? Is there's billions, if not trillions of dollars in institutions and asset managers who recognize that this is where it's all headed, right? If you look at Gen Z and the digital trends, they all want to interact in a more digitally native way. And so what is the money of digital if not crypto and blockchain?
Listen, at the end of the day, it's actually not that complicated, right? Most consumers, within our generation, they want it easy and they want it quick. Neither of those things are happening at the moment, right? So it's inevitable.
You don't want a wire transfer that's going to take 3 days from here to Korea or wherever else?
No, yeah. I do not. I definitely do not. And shocking. Yeah, exactly right. So I think you're going to see a lot of those changes happening very quickly. Again, the regulatory environment needs to change, and I think that's happening. But in the background, man, there's a lot of things happening. It really is. That's the most exciting part. Is the hype is over, but behind the scenes, sort of like the duck, under the water, going as quickly as it can with its feet. That's exactly what's happening in Web3, which is there's so much sort of like action where you can't see it. It's all sort of going to be laid out, if you will, over the next year or so.
And then it's just
that's my hats-off full thing.
I love that. Well, because then next year or the year after or whenever it is, it all hits, and then everyone's like, "Wow!" Suddenly, everything everywhere.
Right,
all at once.
Wait, how did all these projects come out? It's like because we've been building it for a year and a half and building and working hard, frankly.
Yeah, I'm into it. Cool.
I come with a positive vibe today, right? That's what I'm here for.
Yes, that's what we need. And actually, quick note on that, right? I mean, my own crypto journey, like I started in 2017. So I was at a venture studio called Human Ventures. We had a blockchain lab, and they were building this thing called Vanimals at the time. Shout out to Aram and that whole team. Actually, I'm gonna have to send this to them later. But they had this project called Vanimals, which is basically taking endangered animals. And so for every endangered animal, there's like a limited number, and you put it on the blockchain. Each of those animals had unique identifiers, et cetera. And I think at the time, this was like 2017, we're like, what is this? Like, this is interesting. Like, I don't know if it's going to go anywhere. 3 years later, of course, NFTs came out, and we're like, oh, like that's what these guys are building.
That's what it is. You can put a name to it.
Exactly. And so at the time, I bought some ETH, wrote it down, and I moved on. And I thought, who knows? And then all of a sudden 2020 happened, and DeFi and NFT, and then this last bull cycle. So I think lesson to be learned there is, don't fade the tech. I think at this point, as you're saying, Paul, there's so much happening behind the scenes. And so there's every reason to get excited about what's coming up and all the people who are building really cool stuff as this, whether you know it or not.
It's an exciting time, and frankly, I don't need the hype to be able to tell me so, right? I don't. You'll see it. You'll see it soon enough, for sure.
It's coming. All right. Well, we're going to wrap this up, but one last thing is we'd love to have you kind of show yourself and, where can people find you? Where can people get in touch with you and the Ava Labs team and all that? Yeah.
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Twitter/X, whatever you want to call it. I have a really easy last name to spell. No, I'm joking. It's impossible. But you can find me on X at Paul Chodirker. Happy to engage. Send me a DM. We love to speak to as many people as possible. Let's chat for sure.
Amazing. All right.
Awesome.
Well, listen, thanks so much, Paul. This is a great conversation. And I'll see you soon, and I'll see you online.
Thanks you. So really much. Appreciate it. You got it.
Appreciate it. Talk soon. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Netcetera. If you'd like to learn more about marketing and innovation in emerging tech, please visit www.myson.xyz and subscribe to our newsletter at www.netcetera.media to get started. And if you're a fan of the show, please show your support by subscribing and leaving a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.